Well, hello and a very warm welcome to Business Today TV. I am Chetan, Bhutani. India is strategically located on the world's shipping routes with a coastline of approximately 7,517 kilometers and is ideally positioned on the world's shipping routes. Maritime transport handles roughly about 70% of India's trade. In fact, on the other hand, the government has also introduced various fiscal and non-fiscal incentives for enterprises that develop, maintain and operate ports, inland waterways and shipbuilding in India to promote the country's shipping and port industries. With the recent development in the geopolitical space, the global shipping industry has faced various headwinds and the sector is fighting hard to keep shipping and cargo rates stable. To talk more on this today, I am joined by Christian Roeloffs, co-founder and CEO of Container Xchange, a leading online platform for container logistics. Christian, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Hamburg. I'm sure we'll speak on the weather on the later part, but tell us about how's the shipping sector going right now? I mean, global headwinds with the Red Sea crisis. What are you picking up and what is the latest update and what kind of impact are you foreseeing?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me, Chetan. Pleasure to be here. Globally, of course, the shipping industry is facing significant uncertainty, particularly induced by the situation in the Red Sea. Essentially, the Houthi militia rebels in Yemen shooting unmanned drones, cruise missiles, etc., at merchant vessels going past, particularly targeting container vessels. That started end of last year, and particularly in the run-up to Chinese New Year, which historically is always a high-pressure time of the year for ocean transportation. This represented a significant push onto push up of freight rates because capacity was constrained. Carriers had to go around all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, around Africa, and that just put significant strain on global supply chains. Now we see the situation easing a little bit because Chinese New Year is over and carriers had the opportunity to rebalance their networks. But of course, the situation remains uncertain because nobody knows whether this conflict will escalate further or whether it will be resolved anytime soon.
So, Christian, tell us about how and when will the situation is likely to ease off, because India is probably has the largest exposure to the maritime sector with about 70% trade being done through that way. I want to ask you how and when is the situation likely to resolve, and what all sectors are the most important that are likely to get affected in the times to come?
Yeah, so we don't really see this situation to be resolved anytime in the very near future. Just because a political solution to stopping the Houthis from shooting at merchant vessels is not in sight. Tensions in the Middle East Middle East have remained quite high ever since a couple of years ago. So no short-term solution on the political horizon there. And also military solution is very unlikely. The Houthis are just very hard to target from the air, so to speak. And it's also unlikely that any military will put boots on the ground and try to invade Yemen. At least that's not very likely. So it remains to be seen how long this will play out. We don't expect this to be resolved anytime in the near future. In terms of impact on particular countries with a high exposure to maritime transportation, of course, this means that we'll likely see elevated freight rates for longer because carriers have to go around the Cape of Good Hope in order to keep their vessels and crews safe, and that just sort of reduces available capacity in the market, and it's a supply-demand imbalance. Then rates go up. However, yes, please.
Yeah, sure, Christian. Also, thirdly, I want to ask you. You mentioned about the elevated freight rates if the situation doesn't get resolved. Now the question really arises how the countries are going to manage. In fact, the shipping sector has been facing a lot of headwinds, especially with the Ukraine-Russia impact war, and secondly with this Red Sea crisis coming up. Don't you think there could be a global consensus as far as resolving such issues for the sector specific in shipping is concerned, or such headwinds continue to exist and probably would be affecting the shipping sector for a longer time?
I think, to be honest, I think the latter. Even if there is a global consensus on, hey, we want to resolve this conflict, I don't think that there's a viable solution on the horizon. Nobody will want to sort of enter a compromise with the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Nobody will want to put a military solution forward. And as I said, a political solution sort of resolving the conflicts in the Middle East is also very unlikely. So we will very likely have to live with the situation and the affected capacity crunch for longer.
Sure. Okay, the capacity crunch duly addressed. Now I want to shift my focus towards container trading and the leasing rates. This has been the talk of the topic, especially when all the headwinds started. Christian, also tell us, with the elevated freight rates, are the container rates also getting hiked? And we understood that Maersk also in fact hiked prices of its containers. Give us a wholesome impact on what really the situation on the ground is.
Yes, so it's similar to the freight rates. Sort of container prices are very much impacted by supply and demand. And supply of containers or for containers is under pressure because a lot more container capacity is needed to supply the vessels on their long journey around the Cape of Good Hope. So that capacity essentially just gets soaked up and prices are being pushed up. So similar situation there. And this applies both for leasing as well as for trading prices of containers.
All right. And what are the sectors, especially when supply demand gets affected? We usually see the prices of those commodities being transported through shipping get hiked, especially for commodities like oil and natural gas and other products. What are you picking up when it comes to the prices of the crude oil transportation that is getting affected? Any other sectors in particular that you feel will eventually see a hike in prices because of the whole shipping crisis?
To be honest, no. So we haven't seen so much of an impact on oil and gas prices. There was a little bit, but not seriously, because the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is sort of the waterway in front of Yemen, is not the most important choke point for transportation of oil and gas. And also what we've seen in terms of the attacks, they haven't targeted oil and gas transportations primarily. Most of this was targeted bulker and container liners. So little impact there, but very, very limited. In terms of goods and sort of inflationary impact of an increase in container prices and freight rates, I also don't think that this will play a significant role, just because freight rates for most of the goods are just a small part of the overall price, and hence inflationary pressures will also remain.
All right. So you mean to say that inflationary pressures would continue to trouble the sector and not really of a big impact that you're forcing as far as the prices of elevated freight rates are concerned. Could you also give me a highlight on what really on the ground situation is when as far as India is concerned in the whole trade value chain? Where is India standing? Because with the government really performing and putting up fiscal and non-fiscal incentives into picture, what is the feedback on the ground that you get?
Yeah, so of course our Indian-based customers, they are struggling with all of the operational impact of these disruptions, right? Limited container availability, particularly in inland depots, sort of cancelled sailings on short notice, unreliability of supply chains. So that's really what our customers and their customers, ultimately the BCOs and the shippers, what they struggle with. It's actually not so much the price levels; it's really the operational uncertainties.
All right, the operational part, could you give us some more insights on the operational deficiencies that the ship makers, the shipbuilders and the operators on the other hands are facing?
Yeah, so it's not so much the shipbuilders, but it's really the transportation and logistics companies as middlemen between the beneficial cargo owners, the shippers, and the vessel operators, the mainline carriers. And so what their main job is to secure containers, capacity, slots on the vessels at freight rates that are sort of feasible. And of course they struggle with especially the short-term disruptions that they see when vessel owners, vessel operators cancel sailings on short notice, when suddenly there's no equipment available, especially at inland container depots, ICDs within India. And that's, of course, of course, causing a significant disruption to supply chains because you have to then react on very short notice to these disruptions. And this is actually what we see our customers also doing on Exchange. This is what our solution provides them with flexibility to manage these disruptions in an easier way.
Sure. Also, Christian, you are one of the leading, startups and companies for container logistics that, a one-stop shop for everything as far as container-related issues are concerned. How good or bad the demand and supply situation is right now? What are the container rates leading to in the near future? What's your outlook? And of course, really, any interesting trends that you could highlight for our viewers?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that on the freight rate side, we already see rates sort of decreasing and softening a little bit after the end of Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year ended on the 19th of February, and since then we've seen a weakening of freight rates, which was also in line with expectations prior to Chinese New Year. On the container side, we haven't seen this so much. So container prices, particularly in China, have remained elevated and in some cases even increased. And of course, the hypothesis is that this also has to do with a demand coming, for example, from Russia or the China-Russia trade, which also is a very imbalanced trade, and that soaks up capacity and hence pushes up prices. We expect over the next couple of weeks these prices to also soften, to also come down as market participants, primarily the carriers, but also container owners and leasing companies have adjusted to these disruptions, have adjusted to the new normal of the situation in the Red Sea, and are able to provide capacity on a more reliable basis globally and particularly also in India.
Sure. Also, Christian, the supply-demand imbalance, we have discussed very nicely. As far as India's story is concerned, we are really looking forward to understand from you when can India overtake China as far as the maritime superpower is concerned? Because, as far as India's growing population is concerned, China's decreasing population is concerned, and, various efforts by the government in India's, maritime space, and of course the naval exercises also being done. Do you see anytime soon India overtaking China?
Tough to say. I forgot my crystal ball at home, unfortunately. I think this is, there's no easy answer to this question. It's not just sort of the question of what the government is doing. It's not just the question of how exports are developing, but it's a much more macro question. And of course, you also had a lot of discussion around China plus one, supply chain resilience, moving away from China in a little bit of an easier way to make sure that your supply chains are more resilient. This has been a discussion ever since COVID started, but we see now that it's not so easy. Some of these supply chains are very, very intertwined. Some of these supply chains still rely on China, but now things have moved towards China just being a provider of intermediary goods and then final assembly in, let's say, Mexico or let's say Vietnam or maybe even India, then for final sort of onboard transportation to the port of destination. And this is what we see right now. It's very, very complex, and there's a lot of factors at play. And so, unfortunately, I can't say whether India will overtake China anytime soon, let alone on which measure of the economy.
Sure. Also, towards my last set of questions, Christian, any policy level regulations or changes you would recommend for India, because you're there on the ground, you have been a very experienced professional yourself in shipping sector. Any particular set of regulations or probably policy easing or changes that you recommend that should be done?
I don't want to get too involved in political suggestions, I guess, but I think what we see our customers struggling with are just sort of bureaucracy, inefficiency of processes, non-digitalization of processes, still a lot of paperwork, particularly in ports and terminals. So the more, of course, India in the Indian terminals can reduce that and can make sure that processes run smoother, more efficient, faster, and with less effort, with less manpower, manual work, the better. And the more likely it also becomes that India will gain in popularity as, for example, a transshipment hub or a transshipment country. One of the reasons why Jebel Ali, why the UAE is such a popular transshipment destination is just because it's very, very efficient. and it's very digitalized. And the more India can move into that direction, of course, the better to support growth in ocean transportation.
All right, well, Christian, it was a pleasure speaking to you and getting those insightful details on really what India's shipping sector should do. How is the global situation looking like? Christian Roeloffs, thank you so much for joining us on Business Today TV. And we hope that we meet soon in person and when the situation of the global sea crisis, in fact, actually resolved. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Well, that was Christian Roeloffs talking about what really the shipping sector entails for India, the impact of the Red Sea crisis, and of course, potential issues of the elevated freight rates due to the Red Sea crisis. If you've been watching, thank you so much for watching.
ट्रांसपोर्ट नेटवर्क देखता था तो मुझे ऐसे लगता था भाई कब हम